Organisations are the most powerful force on the planet, and the hierarchy has been the dominant mode of organising them for the past century. But the traditional top-down hierarchy wasn't designed for the fast-paced world we live in today. Self-management is an alternative way of organising, a scalable practice that provides structure without a traditional management hierarchy, yet with more clarity, accountability and agility. The paradox of self-management is that the readiness and motivation of the founder is critical to its successful adoption. The first signal of readiness for self-management is based on your own instinct, a deep-level sensing that there is a better way of organising your company that will be more effective and sustainable. Secondly, your vision as founder sees that self-management will empower your team and unlock greater potential than they've been able to access before. With this vision, you can lead the way to a new paradigm for your business by enabling it to evolve and grow through the collective intelligence of your team. I'm Sally McCutchion, a certified holacracy and consciousness coach. In this 30-minute podcast, I'm interviewed by Richard Atherton from Being Human. In it, I talk about the basic principles of holacracy, the most developed and complete method of self-management, and what it really means to adopt and practice holacracy in your business. You can hear more from Richard at firsthuman.com/podcast. And if you have a sense that your business is ready for self-management, get in touch with me directly at hello@sallymccutchion.com or via LinkedIn messaging.
Sally, you've had a stellar career at Flight Centre UK. You left in 2014. You've gone on to develop yourself in many ways, and which includes becoming one of only 2 certified holacracy coaches in the UK, and you're part of the Creative Consciousness Coaching Academy, which brings insights to individuals and organisations seeking to move towards teal, which perhaps we can get onto for those who don't know that. So holacracy, teal, and off the back of a stellar career in industry. So I've had people ask me about holacracy before and what it's all about, and I'm guessing there are going to be people in our audience who are very interested in that. So should we start there, what we mean by holacracy, and get into it a little bit, and then perhaps how you came to it?
Yeah, so holacracy is a method of self-management. So self-management being a management methodology, if you like, and there are various ways that you can practice self-management within your organisation, and holacracy is one of those ways. Holacracy itself, for me, is one of the most sort of mature and one of the most developed off-the-shelf systems of self-management. A lot of the other methodologies are either not as well developed, in my view, or have been sort of developed bespoke, sort of specific within an organisation. So an organisation will find their own method of self-management. It involves creating roles instead of having job titles. It involves having 2 specific meeting processes called the tactical and governance meeting that are specifically designed to support the practice of self-management and get things done within the organisation. And there's a real, I'm sure your listeners will have read, there's so much online about holacracy. There are the lovers and the haters. There's a lot of mixed reports that, holacracy is too rigid. There's reports, particularly in the States, of people leaving companies when their companies have adopted holacracy. So there's a lot of mixed reports, but for me, it's sort of the go-to starting point for self-management, because it provides a sort of a real toolkit of new ways of doing things when you want to shift away from the traditional hierarchical structure.
So you mentioned there, you talked about the shift from job titles to roles, and you talked about these specific types of meetings. What are the big chunky things that companies have to take on to move in this direction that are going to feel very different for companies?
Well, the biggest, chunkiest thing is nothing to do with the actual holacracy processes. It's the mindset shift. That by far is the biggest, chunkiest, potentially most challenging thing that a company needs to know, because it involves a real change in how things are done within a business and how things are done within businesses. You know, by and large, I think the landscape is really shifting quite a lot at the moment. But by and large, the way things are done within an organisation has been the same or very similar for decades. So that's the biggest thing, I think, is the mindset shift.
And what does that look like?
It looks like having a mirror held up to how you think and behave within your business, or for you to be invited to become more consciously aware of your own thought processes and behaviours and how they impact the team, how they're impacting yourself, and what do you want to do about that. There's nothing necessarily enforced in terms of forcing you to change. It's a mirror and it's an invitation to doing things differently.
Is that the essence of the mindset shift? It's becoming reflective, or is it something like that?
There's an invitation to just become much more consciously aware of yourself. And that is probably the biggest barrier, because that can be very challenging and very difficult. But to get into more of the specifics, one of the things that Holacracy invites you to do is to let go of anything that doesn't concern your specific roles. Now, for someone that likes to be a part of everything that's going on, or, you know, in other words, meddle in loads of different things, that can be extremely challenging. So I'm sure for a lot of people, myself included, that would be like, you know, what do you mean? That in itself, for a number of people, particularly the types of people that often end up being leaders, that can be extremely challenging.
Have you had first-hand experience of this?
Of practicing self-management?
Well, and of this shift?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I worked in a Holacracy organisation called Evolving Organisation for about a year. That was in my early days, and that was my sort of training ground really for Holacracy. So I was energising roles and living the meeting processes and working with others that were doing the same, and observing what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and also interacting with others that were experiencing it for the first time, and seeing what challenges it raised within them as well. And
so, first of all, what does energizing role mean? That's going to sound a bit woo-woo, I think, to some people.
Energizing role is basically having a role. So where you have a job title in a business, instead of it being a job title, you're going to have a sort of a portfolio of roles. Energizing the role is just a term that we use to describe how you engage and act in those roles. So basically, it's how you do your job.
And how's that different from like a job description then?
Well, it's not different in terms of what you're going to be doing. What's different is when you've got a portfolio of roles, the first thing that Holacracy says is that a role must have either a really clearly defined purpose, or it must have an accountability, at least one accountability. And an accountability is an ongoing task that another role can expect you to do. So amongst your portfolio of roles, you've got a really clearly defined either purpose that lets you really understand why this role exists, and or you've got a set of accountabilities. So it's really clearly defined as to what is expected of you. Now, one of the main differences within a Holacracy, if you compare that to a job title, job titles and job descriptions might be reviewed, I don't know, once every 6 months, or probably more like once every year, and then put into a drawer, and they're probably outdated within a week, but probably not something that you refer to on a daily basis to help you do the best in your job. It's more like a sort of a theoretical activity that, you know, that happens once in a while within the organisation. Whereas with these job roles, they form part of the live governance records of your organisation. And what that means is that in a governance meeting, they can be changed. They might be changed on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. You know, they might not be changed for 6 months, but the point is they're a live record of what is actually happening and what you are doing within your business. And if you want to change that, or if another role wants to change that because they want to expect something different of a role that you hold, that can be done within the governance meeting. It's a much more live and organic way of working with a description of the purpose of the roles that you hold and what is expected of you.
Back to your experience of it then, so working in evolving organisations, what were the challenges to you psychologically in taking that on?
I mean, I loved it. I have to say, for me, it was what convinced me that I wanted to become a holacracy coach, and what convinced me that this was something that I felt a lot of organisations would benefit from. So I loved the clarity. That was incredible to me. And I loved the ability to get more clear, if I needed. So if a role that I was holding needed another role to do something, I could just go and ask them to do it, and maybe that would work and maybe it wouldn't. So it's absolutely an option that you can just do that. But then as a sort of a backup to that, you've also got this governance meeting process whereby I could check on that role. Okay, is what I need from them listed as one of their accountabilities? Because if it is, I can expect them to do it. If it isn't, it's very much up to that person to look at the purpose of their role and make a decision as to whether it makes sense from their role, from their unique perspective within the organisation, for them to do it. And so what the governance meeting process does is it enables me an opportunity to say, I would like this accountability to be added onto this role because I want to be able to expect it. That clarity for me was just incredible. The meeting processes as well, I don't know about you, but I've sat in too many ineffective meetings, management meetings, where I've come out more frustrated and confused and sort of overwhelmed or overloaded than when I've gone in. And, decisions haven't been made, or decisions have been made without me feeling like I had an input or a voice, just a world of problems, right, around meetings. And so to experience these they are very disciplined processes, the tactical and governance meetings. And that in itself can be uncomfortable. And I remember the first one or two that I ever experienced. And I was like, well, this just feels awkward. I feel like the facilitator is being like a school teacher. And now I can talk, now I can't. It felt really sort of staid, just not warm or engaging in any way. But as I got used to it, you understand what the process is. And then it's just like, yes, thank you. Thank you that there is a meeting that I can step into, and I know that by the end of it, I'll have got what I need.
I saw the quote in the book that said that one guy was reporting, having moved to holacracy, that it done 33 agenda items in 55 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, we had an example at Evolving Organisation. We had a really, really challenging, what would ordinarily be called an HR issue. We had a tactical meeting, and I don't know how long this meeting would have been if we didn't have the tactical meeting processes. It was not just sort of difficult from an HR perspective, but as often is the case with HR sort of issues, there's a lot of emotions involved as well. So you're dealing with sort of a tricky challenge, and with all of the emotions that are layering in on that. I think that, this meeting could have easily have lasted all day without the tactical meeting processes. And we used the tactical meeting, and I don't know, it was about an hour, something like that, maybe an hour 15, I don't remember exactly. But we were just dealing with one tension at a time. Tension being something that you need to get resolved, right? The actual definition of a tension is a gap between what is and what could be. And effectively what that means is I need something. I either need information, or I need to share something, or I need to get something resolved in order to feel more comfortable in my role, or more comfortable as a human being in this organisation. And we just went through it one tension at a time. And as we were getting through them, there was more that was surfacing. So, more tensions were getting added. But when you handle a tension in a tactical meeting, you focus on the person that has the tension, and you ask them, what do you need? And you don't move on from that agenda item until that person has got what they need. And that's a triaging process. So that person might need a conversation with someone else, right? So you're not necessarily having the conversation there, but you're identifying this conversation is needed, and let's note that and acknowledge that this conversation is going to happen at a later date. So it's just identifying the next step to move you forward. And it was an extraordinary example of how the tactical meeting process is, like, first of all, save you hours and hours of time, but second of all, just amplify the efficacy of that meeting in terms of the people involved getting what they need.
So just for people, it might be useful then to use that example to step people through then. So there's this HR issue, somebody has a need, it gets added to like an agenda.
Yeah, so the agenda gets built on the fly. So you don't set the agenda in advance. The idea being that whatever is a live tension in that moment gets dealt with. Like, we might create an agenda last week or yesterday, a couple of days ago, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these are the things that need to be addressed in this meeting here and now. So we build the agenda at the start of the meeting, start off with a check-in process, which, you know, if your listeners aren't familiar, I see this happening more and more often nowadays. Even if you're not practicing holacracy, some organisations use the check-in. And it's just an opportunity. Everyone in the meeting space says whatever they need to say, just to kind of call out any distractions, share anything with the group, and just sort of get focused and get present for that meeting. So that happens one at a time. There's no crosstalk. You know, when you have your time to do your check-in, that is carved out space for you without receiving any judgment, any reaction, any input from anyone else in that room. So we do the check-in, and then there is a series of sort of 3 processes that's called the preamble. And that's where any checklist metrics or project updates are shared with the group. And then we go into triage. So then the agenda is built. So if I had a need to share something with the team about this HR issue, for example, I would put something on the agenda. And it would probably be something, you know, so going back to this particular challenge, my opening need would probably just to share something about what happened. And then as that process developed, because I would get what I need in terms of having the opportunity to share information. And then, you know, someone else might have a need to share something from their perspective, and that would be their carved out time, right? So they don't have to interrupt or find a way of layering their opinion onto what I'm saying. I get space to say what I need to say, and when I've got what I need, the facilitator would move on to their agenda item, and that's their carved out space to say what they need to say. And then off the back of that, you know, if this kind of HR challenge, it then might be, okay, I now I have a need to change something in our policies, you know, in the way things are done within the organisation off the back of this. And each of those can be added to the agenda. And yeah, like I said, I'm asked at the start of each agenda item, what do I need? And we don't move on until I say, yeah, I've got what I need.
And these long discussions within meetings where people kind of hog the stage almost, that can be why meetings can take like so long, right?
Yeah.
And this is a process to get people very quickly to, okay, what's the next step?
Yeah, because the process is facilitated. So, you know, first of all, the process is predefined, so everyone knows exactly what the process is, but also the process is held by a facilitator. And the facilitator's job is not to support the people in the room. The facilitator's job is to support the process and make sure that the process is being adhered to. So yeah, you know, your example of someone hogging the space, or, you know, having the most dominant voice in the room and therefore being the one that speaks the most, that is far less likely to happen because someone else is able to put something onto the agenda and the facilitator makes sure that they are the focus during their agenda item.
So I did one of your workshops where we simulated this. And what it felt to me like was very much like being in a sports game where you have like a referee, and the facilitator is more like a referee.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care about my feelings, and they're not trying to help me get towards some outcome. Yeah. They're just like, no, these are the rules.
Yeah.
And I actually loved it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice analogy. It is like having a referee. And, if you imagine trying to play a sport without the rules and without a referee, then, it would be chaos. Another analogy is, okay, imagine trying to get from A to B in your car without knowing that you have to follow the rules of the road. The rules of the road are there to get you from A to B smoothly. If we didn't have those rules whereby you drive on this side and the person going that way drives on that, the other side, and when there's this mark on the road you have to stop, and if there's lights you have to do what they say, all that sort of stuff. If we didn't have any of that, trying to get anywhere would be complete chaos. And in that situation there isn't even a facilitator. You just know that you have to follow, and okay, yeah, you might get a speeding ticket, or so there are checks and balances there. But fundamentally, everyone knows that these are the rules, and by and large, people follow them because they know that it's in their benefit.
And presumably that happens over time as people get better at knowing the rules. It requires less intervention from the ref.
Yeah.
So back to this question of your experience of it. So were there any sort of frustrations or negative reactions you had as you adjusted?
I guess the best way to describe it was just around the sort of the psychological shift of everyone adjusting to this new way of doing things within the organisation. So, for example, I held the role of Leadlink of one of our main circles. Circle being sort of team, basically, and Leadlink being one of the roles that sort of replaces the management function, except it's very definitely not a management role. So I was in the Leadlink role, and obviously I was adjusting to what I can and can't do, because this isn't a management role, but it does have sort of a similar functionality to a certain extent. So I was adjusting to that, but also the other role holders within that circle also had to adjust. And some people carry their previous experiences, good or bad, of working with a manager, carry those sorts of experiences with you. Adapting to working with a lead link instead of working with a manager was one of the challenging aspects. So, everyone getting used to what are the boundaries of this new role that's called lead link, and how does it differ from being a manager. And that's why at the start, the sort of the biggest, chunkiest thing that an organisation needs to know before entertaining self-management or holacracy is the mindset shifts. And the learning curve can be really bumpy. Remember when you got into the car for the first time with your first ever driving lesson, you know what it's like to be in a car, and being in a car has always felt just really smooth, easy. But now you're behind the wheel and you've got control of everything. Gosh, like that's a big learning curve. And I suppose it's quite similar in a shift to self-management. It can feel really clunky and bumpy at the start.
And is there a specific moment you can think of as lead link where you were like, this feels weird, or you felt uncomfortable?
I do remember something, and I remember sort of writing a post. We used Yammer at the time as our sort of team communication. And I remember writing quite a long post on there around transparency and what I see as my role as lead link, and how that differs to being a manager, and how as a lead link, my expectation is that everyone fully steps into their duty to process tensions. Because one of the differences between a manager and a lead link is that the manager can often be expected to be a bit of a superhero within the team and sort of solve other people's problems, take on some of the meatier challenges and sort of fix them on behalf of the team. And that is very much not a lead link accountability. Everyone within a holacracy organisation, and it's actually written in the constitution, everyone has a duty to process their own tensions. I remember writing this post just saying, these are my tensions and this is how I'm resolving these tensions, and I'm encouraging you all to step into your roles and your duty to process tensions. Because I wasn't a manager, right? That wasn't my role, and I wasn't going to be that sort of superhero. My expectation is that everyone steps up to their sort of responsibilities.
But finally, just on the book, there was this idea that Brian cites, this paradox. Right? And I'll just read it here. When you have a system that distributes authority and honours the autonomy of all of its parts and players, you also get a system capable of acting more as a cohesive, integrated whole at the same time, which I think flows in the face of what a lot of people might intrinsically think about this self-management idea, that somehow the cohesion gets sort of dissipated by distributing all of this authority, and it all becomes a bit of an amorphous mess. And actually you need this central power to keep the whole, and to avoid entropy, right? So what's your take on that? I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's just something that we're not really used to. So, within the context of business, we're long out of the industrial age, but our organizations are still generally structured as they were to fit a sort of industrial age where there is one person in control, commanding what gets done, how it gets done, when it gets done, etc. And that suited us decades ago. And in an information age, doesn't necessarily suit us anymore. That's not necessarily the best model. There's a certain context of a business that makes it hard to understand how that could be true, that, with this increased autonomy and every role having full autonomy over their role, that there is more cohesion. We're just not used to that in the context of business, but actually we are used to it in other areas of life. It's just a question of seeing and understanding how a business could possibly function like this. Within our body, every cell has its purpose, and every cell knows exactly what its purpose is. And every cell can enact its purpose however it sees fit, with the overall intention to keep us alive. There is no one function, there is no one entity within our bodies that controls all of that. There are so many things happening within our bodies simultaneously to keep us alive. If they all had to check in with one thing that said, yes, you can do that, or, no, don't do that yet, we wouldn't survive. There's too much going on simultaneously for that to work. So there's a number of examples where, autonomy towards a shared goal does do exactly what Brian's saying there. I think that within business we're not used to that, because the current sort of hierarchical method has been around for so long. It's almost become our unconscious way of organizing within business. I think what's happening now, and I see it, year on year, I think the consciousness is growing around this. 4 or 5 years ago, even, the hierarchy was even more of an unconscious way of doing things. And I certainly have evidence that increasingly we're becoming aware of the hierarchy, and the pros and cons, and aware of the fact that actually there's an alternative.